Alrighty, we will go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Asia Woods. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, this morning, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to UXPA International's Webinar Wednesday, where we always have wonderful speakers coming in to speak about all different types of UX-related content and talks. And today we have a really, really wonderful talk with Theresa Kane. Her presentation is putting the concept of 2-hour design sprints into practice. And a little bit of bio. Theresa is an author, speaker, entrepreneur, and technology executive with over 15 years overseeing global product and user experience teams. She has diverse experience leading product management, product design, research, strategy, and innovation for digital solutions as a consultant for startup technology firms. Theresa has helped many organizations solve problems faster and implement solutions using the concept of the 2-hour design sprints. She's currently the Director of Product, UX, and Design at TreviPay, where she designs product vision, strategy, and user experience for a B2B financial technology SaaS platform. She's also the founder and CEO of Lucid Startup Consulting, a firm focused on advising strategy and vision for startup organizations to accelerate product roadmaps. So quite accomplished. We're so excited to learn from her this evening. Towards the end of the talk today, we'll have 10-15 minutes of Q&A. So while she's chatting, feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box or just into the regular chat. We'll be sure to get to them. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to you, Theresa. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thanks for having me. And hopefully you can see my slides just fine there. Yes. Perfect. Well, wonderful. Well, thanks everyone for joining. And for those that are going to be trickling in as we go here. Welcome to putting the concept of 2-hour design sprints into practice. I'm Theresa Kane, and I won't go too deep into the introduction. You just heard a little bit about me, but overall, I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn. I'm currently the Director of Product UX and Design at TreviPay. And TreviPay is a global B2B fintech that processes over 7 billion transactions in volume in over 33 countries. So we're a really big organization with around 40 years of experience, but we are a white label solution. So not as well heard of as a PayPal, but really a really big financial organization. So super exciting. And I'll talk about a couple use cases as I go into that. And I'll just kind of jump right into it since you did such a great job on the background as well. One fun fact, I guess, before I move on. So when this topic kind of came out, since kind of scheduling this topic with UXPA, the book has come out on solving problems in 2 hours. So that's kind of something exciting as well that will tie into this. And I'm sure I'll have some questions on that as well. So ultimately, really in looking at this problem that we're talking about today and putting into the practice 2-hour design sprints, one of the problems that, TreviPay experience, as well as many organizations around the world, is they had really based their design thinking model off Stanford's design thinking method, or using the 5-day process from Jake Knapp and the Google Ventures team that came out in 2016, which is a really fantastic book. And with that, 5-day design sprints had its challenges when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. So at TreviPay in particular, we actually have teams around the globe. We have primary offices in the United States, in Australia, Costa Rica, and several other, the Netherlands, and a few other areas, actually Dubai as well. And with that, we were already working with time zone challenges of getting folks on meetings together, which oftentimes when you run a design sprint, that means that you're bringing someone on site or you're traveling somewhere. So when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, we were kind of set with a lot of processes that we weren't really sure how to handle. And in particular, as I'm also over and very active in the UX and design team, we were having a challenge kind of solving problems remote as a group. And so that's really kind of how this trial and error started with design sprints, was kind of just a let's try this out. And when this concept kind of came about, there wasn't really anything on how to run a virtual design sprint, how to run a remote design sprint, how to reduce design sprints. And although I had been practicing shorter design sprints for years, it wasn't something that I was doing virtually. So that was a really big change. So that was really kind of the problem that really led to what we're going to be talking about today in shortened design sprints and the 2-hour design sprint method in particular. And if you have any questions along the way, I'll try to monitor that chat as well. So feel free to throw those in there along the way. So for those that aren't familiar with the difference between design sprints versus design thinking, a design sprint is ultimately a problem-solving method that's inspired by design thinking. So the design thinking method is kind of akin to the waterfall method for those that are in software technology, where you could spend years really working on a solution and then releasing that feature out to clients. So think of the releases back in the day of the different Apple products. It could take years to kind of get those different products out. Fast forward to the 5-day design sprint that Jake Knapp and the team at Google Ventures really came up with to kind of really condense this design thinking process down with a similar method in a 5-day method. And we'll talk about kind of some of the challenges, with both the design thinking and design sprint methods, the traditional methods that kind of led to this process. But ultimately, both of these methods take quite a bit of time, quite a bit of resources and stakeholder involvement. And the opportunity and kind of why, we're talking about today, the 2-hour design sprint method, it really creates more opportunities for success by increasing the frequency and speed of problems you can solve as an organization. And we'll look at kind of that evolution that we just talked about here. So even before the concept of design thinking, which was really popularized by IDEO and Stanford's design school, there were books on visual thinking and design way before that. In fact, it goes back even further, in the 60s and 50s. And fast forward, before the 5-day design sprint was released in 2016, that's something that had been done for years at Google Ventures and later Google, and is something that's still done today. I have several friends that work at Google, and they are doing a ton of design sprints today still. So ultimately, with that, fast forward to 2018, 2019, organizations really started to have trial and error, shortening that 5-day process down to 4 days, 3 days, and then kind of, accelerated with the COVID-19 pandemic in executing a 2-hour design sprint, both not at TreviPay, but several organizations around the world really look to kind of reduce that model. So before we dive into it, some of the success that we had from the 2-hour design sprints and still have. So we actually are conducting anywhere from 20 to 30 2-hour design sprints today at TreviPay. We also conduct a number of design sprints that are longer, so usually somewhere between 4 hours or a day. But a majority of our design sprints are using this shorter workshop method in 2 hours. And with that, we kind of went from running around anywhere from 2 to 5 design sprints a year to over 30 as an organization. And we have a pretty large product, UX, and engineering team. So across that, we have over 20 teams, dedicated teams to different parts of the product or different solutions that are running these methods in order to really bring features right from our backlog into releases with our 2-week agile sprints. And some we have Kanban for a few teams as well. So ultimately, this hybrid methodology allowed us to collaborate as an organization and then accelerate those features during COVID as well as today. It's a model we're still practicing. So for those that aren't as familiar or haven't seen the 5-day design sprint schedule, this is actually an example of the last 5-day design sprint schedule I ran from the last 5-day design sprint several years ago. And what I don't expect you to focus on everything here on the screen, what I want you to really take away is 5-day design sprints are very complex. There is a lot of detail, and oftentimes of all the design sprints I'd ever run or participated in, we never made it through everything on the list. So that's something that just to kind of be aware as we go through condensing that process of some of the significant differences in the efficiencies and collaboration that we'll be talking about. So some of the challenges encountered during 5-day design sprints that I had the opportunity to experience at TreviPay and many of the other organizations I've worked for over the years or with is it's not really a one-size-fits-all option for every organization. So Google and the team at Google Ventures, Jake Knapp, that invented this process, they had a significant budget where they're able to do a number of these large design sprints, spending hundreds of millions of dollars on them every year across their teams. And TreviPay, we have around 700 or 800 employees at our organization. So I'm a larger organization, not a startup, but we're also not as large as Google. So it's very expensive. And for any organization that's either all the way from a startup up to 10,000 or maybe even 30,000, it's very expensive to say that you're going to run a number of these 5-day design sprints to solve complex challenges for your organization and spend that money on them. So for those that haven't had the opportunity to spend that amount, a 5-day design sprint, if you bring in a third party, can cost anywhere from $20,000 to $200,000. In addition to that, you are taking the time and cost of all the stakeholders across your entire organization or with your client as well that's going to be working on it. So very time intensive, very expensive, not as friendly for remote collaboration. I talked a bit about how TreviPay in particular, we're all over the globe. It's impossible to run a 5-day remote design sprint in an international organization. You have to bring employees to one location or another, which is another cost as well. I mentioned Australia. That's about a 33-hour flight from our headquarters. So that's another key point, for some challenges we experienced. And then it's hard to get the key stakeholders to stay in the room together. So you might get them in the room, but staying in there for a full 5 days is hard. And I myself, even on a full day design sprint, I mentioned we still every now and then will do a larger one. It's hard to really make sure that you're dedicating your whole day if you have clients or, a fire or a situation that you need to pertain to at your office. So ultimately, this leads to loss of productive time from the team and additional design sprints, whether you run a 5-day, a 1-day, 4-hour, 2-hour, are always going to be needed. And additional time and design is always going to be needed, regardless of how long you spend on it. Just keeping an eye on the chat there. So in terms of kind of really condensing the method down from 5 days, it was really kind of done through trial and error. So I mentioned I had been running a number of design sprints and a shorter method over the years, and condensing these down to 3 days, 2 days, 1 day, 4 hours. And with the 2-hour method, before the COVID pandemic, everyone was in a room together. You have Post-it notes, markers. You're kind of really having that team building collaboration experience, people coming in and out of the room. And, there's still the key stakeholder availability issues. And then after you kind of get through that process, everyone's exhausted and you're trying to put that everything that you've done the last couple of days together to present it to a client by the last day. So scheduling that was hard. Getting the prototype ready is hard. And with that, if we fast forward to now, 2-hour design sprints are working really successful. I mentioned how many we're doing at TreviPay, as well as, since kind of talking about this topic for the past couple of years, I've had the opportunity to coach over 300 organizations on this through different sessions, like we are here today. And so ultimately, how we're here today, doing video and collaboration, this has really accelerated the success of moving to not only a 2-hour model, but a completely virtual collaborative model. We'll talk a bit more about Figma, FigJam, and the collaborative tools available to that really helped accelerate this. So let's dive into the method. So we talked a lot about the history of the 5-day design sprint for those that aren't as familiar with design sprints. And now let's talk about this 2-hour design sprint method. So ultimately, the method is inspired by both Stanford's design thinking process and the Google 5-day design sprint. And it really culminates kind of a little bit of the best of both worlds and being able to take a problem and work on it together as a group and come up with a solution. So during the 2-hour design sprint, you're focusing on empathizing with customers, exploring the problem, and ideating a solution. And the significant difference in a 2-hour design sprint versus the traditional 5-day is you're moving prototyping and testing outside of the process. And we'll talk about why that's beneficial and so successful here in a minute. So if you recall the 5-day design sprint schedule that we peeked at here a minute ago, this is an example of a 2-hour design sprint schedule. And we'll be jumping into the Figma FigJam solution and use case here in a minute. But this kind of just gives you a high level of how you're really kind of focusing in 2 hours and how you're able to execute this process in 2 hours versus 40 hours. So with this first stage, empathizing with customers, you spend around 30 minutes during the stage. So this is where you're reviewing the opportunity and user personas. You're focusing on what problems your customers are encountering and how often, any key problem that you're trying to solve for the design sprint. And we'll dive into this when we look at the FigJam board a bit more, but ultimately you want to be able to focus on a problem that you'll be able to tackle as an organization or stakeholder group during that time period. And then ultimately defining what you do and don't know about the problem is going to be part of that exercise. So that's really that stage 1 there that you're spending around 30 minutes on. The next stage, you're exploring the problem. And I have some high level examples here, to the right and some of these. So this is kind of showing you some of the outcomes of completing this process in Figma FigJam or another tool like Envision or Miro. And ultimately, you're using these different tools and working together as a team, which we'll again talk about that template. But in this next stage, this is where you're really exploring the problem. And you're defining what the problem statement is as a group. You're using any assumptions you learned from any customer problems at your organization. So let's just take, for example, on an exploration that as an organization, you have a website that's responsive, but you don't have a native mobile app. And you want to be able to explore whether deploying a native mobile app versus a responsive mobile app, which has a significant difference in user experience, is going to be something beneficial for your customers. So that's kind of where you would start to understand what you know about the customers. How often are they logging into the mobile device? What types of mobile devices do they have? Do they have an iOS or an Android device? And ultimately, this is kind of where you kind of walk into some of those situations, and you're not solutioning here. You're really refining what you're understanding your users to be doing, because at the end of this, you're going to be presenting what you think the solution could be to these users and get their feedback. And this last stage, this is where you're ideating solutions. And one of the biggest questions I get during some of these webinars on ideating solutions is, how is it possible? How is there time to sketch during this? And it's really interesting. I've run a number of these 2-hour design sprints, both at TreviPay and in workshops outside of TreviPay. And with that, I've been able to kind of bring the stakeholder groups kind of across the finish line with the sketching. And one thing that I've noticed is some organizations get done with this sketching section and have a solution in mind that the team is voting forward on to bring into further prototype and test. But other organizations, ones that maybe have a design system in place using Figma or other systems, or maybe they just have really well-engined designers that kind of joined it, are taking the solution directly out of the 2-hour design sprint and bringing it right into their backlog with their teams, and they're getting that validation after kind of developing a bit of it. And so that's been something interesting, and we've done that a little bit as well at TreviPay. But this sketching part is so critical because for some organizations, you're coming up with a higher fidelity sketch afterwards, but for others, they're taking that low fidelity sketch. So that's something we'll explore more, and I'm sure will come up in questions as well later. So I mentioned that prototyping and testing were moved outside of the 2-hour process. And this really shows you about how much time you could spend for that. We're really fortunate at TreviPay. We have a really talented UX and design team. And ultimately, since we have a number of existing screens and new screens, they're able to take a prototype out of one of our 2-hour design sprints and really come up with high fidelity designs pretty quickly. But depending whether you have have a design team at all. Maybe you're using a third party. Maybe you're a product manager having to work on the designs. I've had to do that a number of times over the years. That might vary, at your organization. So this is kind of an average based on what I've seen at TreviPay and other organizations. And then this testing portion as well really depends on how much you're testing of the prototype. So at TreviPay, I mentioned we're a fintech. So we have a lot of credit applications. So these are customers that are applying for credit. And with that, if we were to just be testing, one page of an application that allowed them to fill out their info versus just a login page, that's going to be a significant difference in probably something that should take a couple minutes to something that might take, 10 minutes, depending on what you're kind of showing them on the screens. And so this is something to be aware of, that these times might vary, but ultimately the biggest takeaway that I want you to gather on why these were moved outside of the 2-hour process is no matter whether you're running a 5-day design sprint, a 2-hour, or a half day, more design changes and testing are often needed no matter what. And so whether you're modifying this prototype or testing, you're going to have more. And what I found, when I was running the 5-day model, it put a lot of pressures on the designers and the product managers. So on that last 5-day design sprint that I mentioned, I ran several years back, there was a night where I stayed up till 3 a.m. with a designer working on a prototype, for an analytic solution that we were kind of putting right in front of customers the next day. And this was a significant amount of time, and the prototype wasn't really even ready for the users to see, with some like pretty high profile clients that we were showing the next day. So some of the challenges, there's no guarantee that what you have is going to be ready enough for the types of users you get to sign up. You're also really limited to the types of personas that you're able to solve. Even with a 5-day design sprint, it's really better not to try and solve every persona at once. You really want to be able to solve those user groups and focus on that user experience separately. So I talked about an analytic solution. In particular, this was a dashboard. And so what ended up happening with that 5-day design sprint is, we had the concept of users that were a super user that were logging in to receive dashboard analytics versus someone at corporate that just wanted to see a snapshot email on their inbox. So 2 very different experiences, but both personas were there for testing. And so you want to really think about, when we're talking about this 2-hour design sprint model, whether it's 2 hours, 4 hours, or 5-day, really focusing in on that problem, that topic that you're solving as a team, and making sure that you have the right personas or user group that you're testing with, because that's really going to determine the outcome of how quickly you can bring that into solution as a team and get that release out. So I talked a bit about benefits of all types of design sprints. So when should you look to use a 5-day versus a 2-hour? And it's something that while we're not using 5-day, we use this really for multi-day or a little bit longer than 2 hours as well. So any large or complex problem you have, you need the flexibility to schedule it 1 to 3 months out. And you want to make sure that stakeholders, you get to be okay that all of them might not be able to attend. This is where you would have a 5-day design sprint. So this is going to allow you to spend a significant amount of time on the problem. So a perfect example for this is, let's say you're doing a website migration and you have an existing website that's been around for your users for over 20 years, and you're planning to migrate the entire user base either to an entire new website, or perhaps you're doing a mixture of iframing, a hybrid environment that I've seen a lot over the last 10 to 15 years, where you're kind of taking a bit of features over and over before you kind of move everyone there. That's a particular use case where I would spend a 5-day design sprint on that. That's very complex. That's going to take a lot of different user personas. And in fact, it might even be 2 or 3 5-day design sprints. For the 2-hour design sprint we're talking about, this works really well for small to medium problems. You need to schedule it within 1 to 2 weeks, and you want that participation from all stakeholders. So really good topics for this are anything already on your backlog or in a discovery stage, anything that has a client request with a quick delivery date. You're wanting to advance your product into a new industry or a persona, or a feature that one of your clients is excited about, or even something competitive that you're looking to kind of get ahead of a competitor. So these small or medium problems make great topics for 2-hour design sprints. But if you plan to do a larger problem, what I recommend is kind of breaking this up into 2 or 3 2-hour design sprints. So again, kind of going back to the personas, if you have a new dashboard screen that maybe you have a CEO that's going to log in versus a super user that's going to be doing all the data analysis, you might have a 2-hour design sprint to solve for the CEO that's going to be logging into the dashboard, and then a separate 2-hour design sprint to be talking about the super user. And then you are really solving for those different experiences and focusing in on the user persona for those experiences instead of trying to shove it all into one design sprint. And that would apply whether that's a 2-hour or a longer design sprint. So I want to show you a use case. Whoops, went right over it. Before we dive into the benefits, I wanted to just show you a quick use case of a 2-hour design sprint. So this is what you're looking at right here, and I have some links later of the FigJam board, but this is actually the 2-hour design sprint template. So we're not focusing like too high level in it. We'll go kind of zoom in a bit more on screens here in a bit, but ultimately this gives you an idea of having everything in one place. So for those that have ever done in-person design sprints, you're no longer putting papers all around the room. Everything is right in front of you in a collaborative virtual tool. And this allows every stakeholder, whether international or in person, to be able to all work out of the same collaborative whiteboard. So this has really created a lot of the efficiency in accelerating the decisions. So you're able to see everything that's happening in front of you, and you're able to solution together quicker. And in this particular use case, this was actually a 2-hour design sprint that was done on kind of reinventing a dashboard design, and the movement. You'll kind of see high level here. What was happening today was more of a list, like a Craigslist type website. And the movement was moving to more of a cards method, something along the lines of a Pinterest, just to give you a visual idea, knowing you're probably familiar with both those sites. So ultimately, this 2-hour design sprint successfully was able to come up with a concept of cards, and then that is kind of the use case for how that design would migrate next steps. And this particular one, additional high fidelity prototyping and testing was needed. So that kind of shows you the difference for those teams. So let's talk about the benefits of 2-hour design sprints. We talked a little bit about what it is, but let's talk about why there is value in a 2-hour design sprint. So it's probably easy to say it's only 2 hours. For anyone that's sat in a room for any long meeting, whether it's a design sprint or not, full-time attendance and making sure you have fully engaged attendees, it's really critical, and you really have to time cap it. In fact, the webinar that we're on today, it is 1 hour. So imagine if you sat on a webinar that was for 40 hours, like a longer design sprint. So that's really critical. 2 hours, getting that full attendance and engagement, and then setting that agenda and sticking to it is also critical. Another benefit is that everyone can be 100% remote. So in addition to not needing a conference room for 5 days or even a little bit shorter periods, but more than 2 hours, this really caters well to international teams. So just referencing again, if we are trying to run a design sprint with our team in Australia, it's a little early for them. I think it's only 7 a.m. when it's 4 p.m. our time, but we're able to schedule a design sprint from 4 to 6, kind of having them get in, an hour earlier and us staying an hour late. With our teams in the Netherlands, we like to schedule their design sprints from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. in the morning. And again, we're able to get everyone on the same call. And we have also done use cases where we have both our US, Australia, and Netherlands team on there. And usually that's somewhere where we're kind of making a sacrifice, but we're able to do it with 2 hours. So that's what's really critical and why that's worked so well. Another thing is it's not just about the collaborative tool, but also video collaboration. So whether you're using Zoom, Teams, or another tool, it is great to be able to see everyone that you're collaborating with, but it's not required. And one of the questions that I've gotten asked before is, can I do this asynchronously as well? And absolutely. So you can do this entire process asynchronously if you need to, and you really have some difference in time zones that are really going to be challenging for your team. Another benefit is less setup time. When I would run longer design sprints, it takes a lot of setup. So you have large white pieces of paper, you have post-it notes, markers, and before it starts, during the day, after it starts, you're kind of always organizing and putting everything together during the day and setting it up. And staging the room is challenging. And what's even harder is you're trying to kind of coordinate everything at the end of the day. And so you're trying to really understand what the handwriting is and so forth. So it makes it pretty challenging, but ultimately you're saving tons of hours. I mean, the setup time for a 5-day design sprint isn't even included in those 40 hours. There's probably another 10 to 20 hours of setup time, and then kind of really getting all the data together to kind of present that solution and outcome for your organization. Another benefit is that anyone on the team can be a moderator. And this is something that is a bit different from that 5-day design sprint. So the 5-day design sprint by Jake Knapp and the team at Google really did focus on bringing in third parties allows you not to bring in bias to your organization. And that's something that really has been challenged over the years by a lot of organizations and all over, as well as organizations I've worked with, and some of the efficiencies that are created with these 2-hour design sprints. So a lot of that is these third-party organizations could be costly, but some of it is having a subject matter expert drive the decision-making on the product and get stakeholder alignment is part of the role, for that product manager or your UX and design team. And when you bring in a third party that knows nothing about your company, where it's been, where it's going, the details of your product, and you're asking them to recommend where your product should go, it can sometimes be challenging if they're not a subject matter expert in the space or the product. So that's why a lot of organizations kind of moved outside of using consulting firms to do this. Now, there is a time and a place for using consulting firms, and not every organization has a capacity to even run a 2-hour design sprint. So there absolutely is a time and a place to use moderators, but you want to make sure that that moderator knows about your industry, your product, or your users to be successful in operating the 2-hour design sprint. All right, so here's that collaborative whiteboard tool. I've used a number of tools over the years. In fact, I started out design sprints in Envision years ago. I've also used Miro, and Figma FigJam I've been using for a number of years, actually since their beta started, I believe in like 2021. So this is, for those that are not a Figma user or a FigJam user, Figma is their design tool, and FigJam is the collaborative whiteboard that the 2-hour design sprint template that I'll show you here is built out of. So if you're wanting to try that out for free, there's a QR code there. Envision has a tool called Freehand. It has a max of 100 active collaborators, and then Figma has unlimited collaborators. So I think whether you're new to Figma or not, there are some, I believe you have a couple free projects no matter what, but I definitely recommend either of these tools to get started if you're not using them today. Another key benefit, not using paper for sketches. So we talked about kind of setting up your whiteboard for writing things down, but it also goes with the sketches. So what's great about a collaborative virtual 2-hour design sprint is you can use any tool you want. Figma, Balsamiq, Snagit, PowerPoint, Word, and paper as well. So it really kind of opens up the door, and you'll kind of notice here on the screen, some folks have done a paper design, some have built kind of a mock-up in a design tool. So you're able to really use the tool that works best for your own creative thinking. And with a design sprint, you want every single stakeholder to present their idea. It's so critical to hear how everyone visualizes a solution. So this is a big part of allowing anyone that is joining to be able to have that experience. So it's very critical. And on this, in talking about, we're looking at the designs here, the documentation and design in one place we kind of touched on. So having everything there, you're not having to take pictures and keep track of the Post-it notes, trying to read handwriting. So ultimately, with this process, it's not even just about being able to spend 2 hours to kind of come up with a solution, but it's about the engagement that you're creating with your stakeholder group. And this engagement is creating buy-in for the solutions you're coming up with together. And when you create that type of buy-in and collaboration, you're going to have a better chance as a product manager or UX designer or engineer or whoever is running this at your org. You're going to have a better chance of selling the solution, not only with your customers, but also with your stakeholders and your executive team as well. So this is why it's so important to be able to showcase how you got to that decision and be able to show that recommendation that you're having for your organization. And another favorite thing, virtual voting. So in the FigJam tool, you're not having to take a pen, and star the whiteboard. You're able to kind of do virtual stamps. So again, going back to that engagement, you're able to kind of absorb everything that you're seeing and be able to do that stamping. And then really with these last two on the benefits, one of the biggest benefits we've seen at TreviPay and other organizations that I've talked with that are running these shorter design sprints, you're able to conduct multiple design sprints in a week, in a day, in a month. And that really right there is the biggest benefit. So I mentioned at TreviPay, we have around 700 or 800 employees and over 20 engineering teams. So we have a lot of different ideas that if we weren't running the concept of 2-hour design sprints or any type of workshop where we're spending a couple hours, we're missing out on opportunity for collaboration and engagement and decisioning before we start working on an item. And when you have such a large amount of engineering teams with several other organizations having more, some having less, you need to be able to move quickly, because take a look at kind of the disruption that's happening, for instance, in the technology space. If you flash back several months ago to when ChatGPT came out, that was a big disruptor. A lot of organizations now are trying to figure out how they can say they do AI today. So that's what you're really trying to get ahead of. You want to stay ahead of the market, not just for and from a competitive standpoint, but for your customers that are going to be able to gain value from that as well. So the more that you're able to solution as a team, whether you're using this model or another, I encourage you to try and have a method where you are exploring problems and coming up with solutions together as a team to be able to get that feedback faster and get it out quicker as an organization or a team. And we talked about, this, just summarizing it up, but ultimately that's the goal here, right? So how can you implement solutions faster by deploying a method like the 2-hour design sprint process so you can get feedback in earlier and be able to kind of get things started. All right, so let's talk about how you can get started. All right, so I mentioned kind of this has been a process I've kind of been talking about for a bit of time. And this template that you're seeing right here has actually morphed. So some of the ones that you saw earlier were the original version, and this is actually the latest version out on Figma FigJam. And if you're a Figma user or not, if you go to the Figma community and search for 2-hour design sprints, there's a QR code there if you're wanting to look for it too. This is going to allow you to, for free, just download the template and be able to use it. And actually, you can download it, but you would be opening it in FigJam to use and start collaborating on. So some of the things that I've added in there just to help really, for those that are kind of using it, is kind of some reminders. So one of the things that we didn't focus too much on just with the time period here with the webinar, but before you go to conduct a 2-hour design sprint, you want to make sure you know who you are trying to solve the problem for. But ultimately, when you're creating that agenda, you want to make sure that you have the right stakeholder group there to be able to participate in that design sprint. So this sometimes could be a mixture of those that are talking to users, maybe your account management team, your support team, product team, engineering team, maybe you have an executive stakeholder. This is really critical in making sure that you have that stakeholder list And in this template, there is an example agenda to use for the process as well that kind of walks you through exactly what you need to do for the process. The next pre-work item is really understanding the problem you're trying to solve and making sure that you have an idea of what the goal is going to be for that group to be able to come in and execute this 2-hour design sprint process. So an example problem statement, we talked about the mobile app situation earlier. Maybe you currently have a responsive website and you're considering creating a native iOS mobile app or an Android mobile app for your users. So your problem statement could be around understanding whether users would use a native mobile app more than they would a responsive mobile app based on the user experience and interactions feedback you've gotten from stakeholders. And this is going to allow you to focus in on those personas. So knowing who is using your product. And again, I have the option in here for 2 personas, but ultimately focusing in on your primary user persona is going to add a lot of benefit. And I see a question in, so I'm going to answer that question. It says, do you have any thoughts on the best in-person locations to host a 2-hour design sprint if one doesn't have an office space, very conducive for inspired thinking? So that's a really great question. So we are at TreviPay, a hybrid organization. So a majority of our product and technology team is remote around the globe. And then we have a number of folks that are coming into different headquarter offices Tuesday through Thursday, and then some that are working from different locations not in there. And so ultimately, the best in-person locations, if you're wanting to be able to get that group back together, we have run 2-hour design sprints in a Upwork space before. So a space that's rented that allows kind of a separate, an Upwork or another building space, we're able to do that. So that is an option for that. But also this process doesn't necessarily require you did in person. So you could do it 100% virtually. I know there are still a lot of remote first technology organizations, some that are hybrid and some that are going back. So the benefit of this template that you're looking at right now is everything can be done 100% remote from your office or home with every stakeholder kind of engaged in that. So that's some of the options that are available there. So after that pre-work stage, there is kind of a second option on what happens during the 2-hour design sprint. So this is everything we kind of just walked through on how to really go through the stages of understanding your customers and understanding the problems that they're having, all the way to solutioning, and then really talks about what happens after the design sprint as well. So this kind of gives some options in terms of how you kind of go about your first 2-hour design sprint. So so that's out there. Always happy to answer questions on that also after this as well. So ultimately, kind of with some of the tools that we just talked about on, how the process came about, some of the benefits and advantages of it, and how to ultimately choose the right problem to move forward with the 2-hour design sprint, you ultimately have all that you need to be able to try it out if it was something that your organization wanted to try a problem with. So some of the best ways to do that is really figuring out what's a good problem your organization is looking to solve, whether that's a technology problem or a problem with another department. So this process we've actually deployed on a subset of different teams, including our marketing, operations, and support teams to kind of solve a number of different internal problems in addition to our client-specific problems that have releases on an agile sprint release. And in addition to that, anyone could be a moderator. So whether it's you or someone on the team that you're wanting to try this process out, that's really some of the key differentiators from design thinking or the traditional design sprints is anyone can run a 2-hour design sprint. So it's something to try and something that, you might have the opportunity to go solve a problem you weren't thinking about having the time to solve as an organization at all. So some of the key takeaways, ultimately, we use this method at TreviPay. And again, in addition to 2-hour design sprints, we're using a number of different methods, of workshops. We have a pretty robust UX and design team where we're conducting, anywhere from 30 to 50 research projects a year. So this is one of our many processes that we're implementing in addition to other areas of expertise. And some of the key takeaways are using this method will allow you to release features faster. You're able to conduct multiple design sprints in a month or a day or a week. You're able to create more buy-in with internal stakeholders. And ultimately, if you gain anything from today, the hope is, being able to build a hybrid methodology that allows your organization to problem solve faster is really the inspiration I'm hoping you'll gain from this session, and that you don't always have to follow every single, method that's going to take 40 hours or, several years. Several organizations, not several, hundreds of organizations around the globe are trying this method and other methods to really reduce the time to market for problem solving and solutioning. So ultimately, this is just a method that will allow you to kind of explore that and see if you're able to take some of the ideas or concepts you have or some of the problems and challenges you have as an organization and be able to solve them together. And just kind of tying back to, I mentioned kind of, a change in what's going on in the technology market with ChatGPT. So ultimately, this process is really allowing the ability to reinvent, the business model before circumstances force you to, or before the market forces you to with competitors. So, in addition to that, I know we just had an hour today, but if you had any interest in learning more about the 2-hour design sprint process, there is a book out on Amazon as well as a Udemy course as well. And I'm also happy to always answer any questions as well. I'm looking in the chat right now and I'll go to my question side. But ultimately, today we kind of just did a snapshot of some of the benefits. But if you wanted to dive a little bit more into how to execute it and learning a step-by-step guide on how to do that process, both of these are available for you as well. And then what I'll do is I will open it up to questions. And again, if you aren't wanting to ask questions today, I'm always happy to connect on LinkedIn, or you can go to 2hourdesignsprints.com and post a question on there as well.
Thank you so much, Theresa. That was absolutely fascinating. Truly, truly fascinating. I'd love to hear the case studies. I mean, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for doing this. I'll give folks a couple of minutes to type any questions they may have into the chat or the Q&A box. And in the meantime, I will let you guys know about some upcoming things we have going on for UXPA if you want to hear more. So on August 16th, we have another webinar coming up with one of our board members actually hosting it. And stay tuned to our social media. We'll actually be posting it tomorrow. So if you're interested in learning from more of our wonderful speakers and board members, we would love to have you on August 16th. While you guys are typing any other additional questions, I do have one question for you, Theresa. So I'm wondering, I mean, this presentation was full of so many benefits of the 2-hour design sprint. What maybe is the 1 or 2 biggest tips for maybe advice for getting like certain skeptical colleagues or bosses maybe who just simply think that 2 hours is not enough time to come up with the right solutions? What are some of the 1 or 2 things we should really hone in on?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think, the biggest thing is trying it out. So it's interesting. So I kind of honed in on, with 1 hour, just a handful of use cases, but ultimately, some of the organizations that I've been able to work with outside of TreviPay on this method had kind of gone in on the skeptic route as well. And once they tried the process out, most of the accolades are around, wow, I didn't think we could do it, and we did it, and we're still doing it. And so I think that's really the biggest key takeaway is, you have nothing to lose. It's 2 hours, and there's a free template out there. So it kind of just, that's kind of the biggest takeaway is, understanding whether you're able to take that method and be able to really problem solve the needs of your organization, or perhaps you have a feature that you're stuck on and you're really wanting to solution as a team. So it really gives that ability to kind of just jump in there and try it out.
That's awesome. Thank you. I'll remember that for myself for sure. unless anybody has any other questions, we would love to know, Theresa, anything else coming up for you that we can stay abreast of, any future webinars or things you're excited about?
Yeah, so I have a number of different events coming up. I just recently did a podcast with UI Breakfast, and I'll be speaking at UXDX in Dublin here in a couple months, and a couple other conferences. But the best way to stay in touch with me and look at kind of that schedule is 2hourdesignssprints.com, where I'll have that listed, and then any podcasts as well, and also staying connected on LinkedIn, which I think we also have a question too, so I can pivot to that too. Mm-hmm. So one of the questions that just asked, do you ever run separate sessions to explore the problem space and then explore the solution space to allow people to reflect on the problem? And yes, that's a really great answer, or a great question. So I have done that before. So in particular, this really works well when you have a problem that's maybe not small or medium, but maybe not a large problem, and you're really just trying to get stakeholder alignment. So when you're doing that, what I recommend doing is you're kind of almost doing a brainstorm workshop where you're honing in on the problem first. And there are a number of really great like brainstorming templates out on like Figma, FigJam already, but that's what I would really recommend doing, is taking that problem and really honing in on how you really narrow it down before going into the design sprint. Because if you don't, to your point, if you don't do that, you're not going to be able to have agreement when you get there. And that means you might not come up with a solution together. So definitely you can separate in either we're going to explore the problem with the first 2-hour design sprint, and then we're going to solution the second. Or you could just do a flat 2-hour brainstorming workshop where you hone in on the problem and then go in with the 2-hour design sprint after you've done that. Another question, how much time do you give participants to sketch? Do you have each participant share their ideas with the group? That's a really great question. And, one of the things I was reflecting on this, trying to gauge with time, which slides, obviously got some other slides as well. So a good stakeholder mix is really making sure you don't have more than 15 or 20 in your 2-hour design sprint. And that is so you're able to really time box not just the sketching, but also the presentation portion of sketching like you would do in a traditional design sprint. So usually what I do is I cap the sketching down to 20 to 25 minutes. If you're running ahead on any area, like let's say you did a ton of pre-work and everyone's like, yes, we know the personas, yes, we know the problem, and you kind of went through things a little faster, sometimes 30 minutes, but that's a more rare one. But ultimately 20 to 25 minutes for sketching. And then that leaves an additional 1 to 2 minutes for every single individual to hold up what their sketch is going to be and present on it. And actually, just an example, I do a lot of these. So, you're able to hold it up, and either they're physically holding it up, which I'll tell you still happens a lot, or you are looking at it in the FigJam board, which I definitely recommend those that are doing paper, that still happens, that you have every single individual upload it into the FigJam board so everyone can see it, even if they're holding it up or you're looking at it right in front of you. But that gives plenty of time.
Thank you. That was great. Great questions, you all. All righty, let's see. We've got 5 minutes or so. If people have any other lingering questions, now's a great time to ask. We will also, this webinar is being recorded, so it'll be on our YouTube channel by tomorrow or the following day if anybody wants to rewatch it.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for having me. And if anyone has any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out, and good luck in trying out your first 2-hour design sprint.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Theresa, for joining us. Everyone have a wonderful evening or day. We'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.